Whenever people talk about the foundation of a country, the conversation almost inevitably drifts toward the United States Constitution. It is treated almost like a sacred text, preserved under thick glass in Washington, revered, debated, and fiercely protected. But it brings up a fascinating question. If we look across the globe, at the most populated countries on every single continent, is there an equal to this document? Are other nations trying to replicate that exact American blueprint? And more importantly, would it even be in their best interest to do so?
That is a brilliant way to frame it because we tend to view the US Constitution as the ultimate operating system for a democracy. But when you actually travel the globe and look at the legal source code of other massive nations, you quickly realize that the American model is not the universal standard. In fact, in many ways, it is a historical anomaly. If we are going on a continental tour of the world's demographic heavyweights, we are going to find that a constitution is essentially a mirror. It reflects a nation's specific traumas, its cultural DNA, and its unique historical baggage.
Let us start that tour in Asia, with the most populated country on Earth, India. Now, India is a massive, thriving democracy. Do they have something equivalent to the US Constitution?
They do have a constitution, but calling it an equal to the US version is where the metaphor completely breaks down. If the US Constitution is a concise, elegant little haiku, the Indian Constitution is a sprawling, multi-volume epic novel. The US Constitution has 7 original articles and 27 amendments. It is about 4,500 words long. The Indian Constitution, on the other hand, is the longest written national constitution in the world. It has nearly 450 articles and is well over 140,000 words.
That is staggering. Why is there such a massive difference in length? Does a government really need 140,000 words to establish its basic rules?
In India's case, absolutely. Think about the context of its creation in the mid-20th century. The framers of the Indian Constitution were not just setting up a government, they were trying to stitch together a subcontinent. They had to account for hundreds of princely states, multiple major religions, a rigid caste system they were trying to dismantle, and dozens of distinct linguistic groups. They could not afford the luxury of being vague. The US framers left a lot of things unsaid, which is why the Supreme Court spends so much time interpreting what they meant. India's framers wanted to leave as little to interpretation as possible to prevent the country from fracturing.
So, in a way, brevity is a luxury of a relatively homogeneous founding group, whereas extreme detail is a survival mechanism for a highly diverse one. That makes perfect sense. Let us cross over to South America. Brazil is the giant of that continent. What does their fundamental law look like?
Brazil is a fascinating contrast. Their current constitution was adopted in 1988, and it is famously known as the Citizen Constitution. Much like India, it is incredibly detailed, but for a different reason. Brazil was emerging from 2 decades of a brutal military dictatorship. When the people finally got the chance to write their own rules, they wanted to guarantee every single right imaginable, so that authoritarianism could never creep back in.
I imagine that includes a lot more than just freedom of speech and the right to bear arms.
Exactly. The Brazilian Constitution guarantees the right to education, healthcare, maternity leave, and even a clean environment. It dictates specific tax rates and regulates the financial system down to the granular level. But here is the catch. Because it includes so much specific policy, it has to be amended constantly just to keep the government functioning. It has been amended over 100 times in just a few decades. The US Constitution is like a stone tablet. It is incredibly hard to alter. Brazil's constitution is more like a living Wikipedia page, constantly being edited to reflect the current reality.
Which brings up a really philosophical point. If a constitution is too easy to change, does it lose that aura of supreme authority? But if it is too hard to change, does it become a straitjacket?
That is the ultimate constitutional dilemma. And it perfectly transitions us to Africa, where we look at Nigeria. Nigeria is the most populated country on the African continent, and interestingly, it is the one that most closely mimics the American model.
Really? In what way?
After moving away from the British parliamentary system and enduring periods of military rule, Nigeria adopted a constitution in 1999 that established a federal republic. They have a bicameral legislature, a Senate and a House of Representatives, and a powerful executive president, very much mirroring the United States. They took the American hardware, so to speak.
But does the software run the same way?
That is the million-dollar question. The text looks familiar, but the political reality is vastly different. Nigeria struggles with deep ethnic and religious divides, corruption, and the legacy of colonialism. It proves a very harsh truth. You can copy the exact words of the US Constitution, but you cannot copy the centuries of institutional trust, economic conditions, and civic culture that make it work. The document alone is not magic.
It is almost like buying a grand piano and expecting it to automatically make you a maestro. The instrument is there, but the music comes from the culture playing it. Let us look at Europe. Russia holds the largest population there. Where do they stand on the constitutional spectrum?
Russia has a written constitution, adopted in 1993 after the fall of the Soviet Union. On paper, it looks incredibly democratic. It guarantees human rights, a multi-party system, and a separation of powers. It was heavily influenced by Western constitutional experts at the time. But again, we see the gap between the text and the reality. Over the years, through various amendments and the centralization of power, the executive branch has overwhelmingly dominated the system. It is a stark reminder that a constitution is only as strong as the independent courts and civil society willing to enforce it.
So we have looked at Asia, South America, Africa, and Europe. Let us hit Oceania. Australia is the major player there.
Australia is a unique hybrid. They have a written constitution that took effect in 1901, and it borrows from both the US and the UK. They have a federal system with a Senate and a House, much like America, but they retained the British parliamentary tradition where the executive is drawn from the legislature. Here is the most striking difference, though. The Australian Constitution has no comprehensive Bill of Rights.
No Bill of Rights? In the modern era, that sounds almost dangerous. How do they protect individual liberties?
They rely heavily on the common law system and the democratic process itself. There is a deep-seated cultural trust that elected parliaments and independent judges will protect fundamental rights without needing a specific list written down. It is a totally different philosophical approach. Americans believe rights must be explicitly shielded from the government. Australians generally trust the democratic institutions to figure it out fairly.
That leaves us with one final continent before we tackle the core of the issue: Antarctica. Obviously, there is no permanent native population, but there is a governing framework, right?
Yes, and it is beautifully simple. The Antarctic Treaty of 1959. It essentially says, no military activity, no nuclear tests, and the entire continent is dedicated to peace and scientific discovery. In a way, it is the most successful constitution on Earth because it is the only one that has never had a civil war or a human rights violation. Though, to be fair, penguins are notoriously easy to govern.
That is entirely fair. So, looking at this global tapestry from India's massive epic to Brazil's living document, to Nigeria's American replica, to Australia's unwritten trust, are any of these nations actually moving toward the creation of a strictly American-style document?
The short answer is no, and the deeper answer is that they really do not want to.
Why not? The U.S. model has survived for over 2 centuries. It is the oldest active codified national constitution. Why wouldn't other countries want that kind of stability?
Because what Americans view as stability, much of the rest of the world views as paralysis. The US Constitution is incredibly rigid. To amend it requires a two-thirds majority in both houses of Congress and ratification by three-fourths of the states. In today's hyper-polarized world, that is practically impossible. Most modern nations believe that a constitution should be adaptable. They want a framework that can respond to rapid technological changes, climate crises, and shifting social norms.
So the rigidity is actually seen as a flaw, not a feature.
Precisely. Furthermore, the US Constitution is primarily a document of negative rights. It tells the government what it cannot do. It cannot restrict speech. It cannot search you without a warrant. But modern constitutionalism, as seen in places like Brazil or South Africa, focuses heavily on positive rights. Modern nations want their constitutions to guarantee things like housing, clean water, and digital privacy. The American document is a brilliant product of the 18th century, heavily focused on preventing a king from taking over. But a 21st century nation is usually more worried about corporate monopolies, environmental collapse, and ensuring a social safety net.
That completely shifts the perspective. If a rapidly growing, highly populated country today were to adopt a carbon copy of the US Constitution, it sounds like it would actually be to their detriment. It would lock them into an archaic framework that is too hard to change and does not address modern human needs.
Exactly. It would not be in their favor at all. The genius of a constitution is not in its exportability. Its genius lies in its exact fit to the people it governs. The US Constitution works for the United States because the American political culture has evolved around it, reveres it, and relies on a powerful Supreme Court to constantly reinterpret its vague clauses for the modern day. If you drop that same document into a country with a different history, different economic struggles, and different social expectations, it would likely collapse under its own inflexibility.
It is a profound realization. We often look for a universal standard in governance, a single, perfect blueprint that can just be copy-pasted to solve the world's political problems. But what we find instead is that law is organic. It has to grow from the soil of the nation it governs.
It is organic and it is fragile. A constitution is ultimately just ink on paper. It only has power because millions of people collectively agree to wake up every morning and believe that it has power. The moment that belief fades, the document means nothing, no matter how elegantly it is written or how long it has survived.
That leaves us with a fascinating thought for the future. As we move deeper into an era of artificial intelligence, globalized economies, and borderless digital communities, the very nature of a nation-state is changing. Perhaps the next great constitutional model will not come from the 18th century, and maybe it will not even be tied to a physical continent. As the world transforms, our blueprints for society will have to transform right along with it.